Chair. So for this class, I don't know how many of you are aware that Russia played a big role during the Civil War, and actually Tsar Alexander II sent his navy on both the east and west coastlines to defend Lincoln's Union because Britain and France were thinking of intervening for the Confederate independence. But you know, enough people are aware of this, but I think that not enough people ask the question, why did Russia do this? So this class is going to go into that. Does someone want to read the James Fenimore Cooper quote?
Whenever the government of the United States shall break up, it will probably be in consequence of a false direction, having been given to public opinion. This is weak point of our defenses and the part to which the enemies of system will direct all their attacks. Opinions can also be perverted as to cause the false of seem true. False to seem true. The enemy, a friend, and the friend, an enemy. The best interests of the nation to appear insignificant and trifles of moment. In a world, the right, the wrong, and the wrong, the right. In a country where opinion has sway, to seize upon it is to seize upon power. As it is a rule of humanity that the upright and well-intentioned are comparatively passive, while the designing, dishonest, and selfish are the most untiring in their efforts. The danger of public opinions getting a false direction is fourfold, since few men think for themselves.
Good job.
So this is a very prophetic quote for many reasons, one of them being the situation that's going on in the United States today, which I think we would agree is likened to a second civil war, but also this question of the opinion being so perverted that the false may seem true, the enemy a friend, the friend an enemy, which is exactly what's going on between the United States and Russia today, for they are in fact the best of friends. I think it is evident, right, I already went through that, so some might be wondering, is it really so bad that the US could possibly collapse? After all, isn't it acting like the worst of empires? Isn't it wreaking havoc on the world today? What better outcome then that it collapses internally and spare the world from further wars? It is true that the US is presently acting more like a terrible empire than a republic based on liberty and freedom. It may even be the case that the world is spared for a time from further war and tyranny if the US were to collapse. However, this is unlikely, and it most certainly would be only temporary, since it is not the US that is the source of this monstrosity, but rather it is presently simply its instrument, which I'll go over further in this class. Thus, if the US is encouraged to collapse, the bigger loss will be what the American system first set into motion into the world in opposition to systems of empire. Though at this time, this opposition to empire from the US has been buried deep, it is still not too late to revive its original spirit. If the US were to collapse today, it would descend into anarchy and would set the world even further back from the goal of attaining peace among sovereign nation states. It is thus in the best interest of everyone that the US is supported in returning to its true republican roots, rather than watching it burn from a distance, for it is only through a functional US that the true root of empire and tyrannical oligarchism can be defeated. So, this is a picture of Leibniz, Czar Peter the Great. For those who are not aware of who Gottfried Leibniz is, he at the time, there wasn't really a concept of science per se or a profession of science, if you can believe it, and it was more considered natural philosophy. You know, you got your grants from a king or a well-to-do patron.
What time period?
I have the date at the bottom of my notes. He was 1646 to 1716. Peter the Great is 1672 to 1725. So Leibniz was at the forefront of not only creating an actual structure for the sciences in general, he also invented the calculus, or discovered the calculus, but he was also shaping the concept of science in its role within political economy, that they weren't separated. And so he was organizing all across Europe with these ideas, and Peter the Great was probably the most influential person that completely adopted Leibniz as his student. Leibniz joked that he was the soul, you know, you have the Solon of Athens, who created all of the what is considered the root, the birth of Western democracy in ancient Greece. Well, Leibniz joked that he was the Solon of Russia, because Peter the Great gave him the go-ahead to basically reform the legislature and also reform the sciences and so forth. So even though Leibniz was German at birth, he was one of the major influencers of what shaped later on American philosophy. That is the concept of creative industry in the arts and sciences as a foundation of economy based on freedom and liberty. So these are not separated concepts. Though Benjamin Franklin and Leibniz never met, because Leibniz passed away 1716 and Benjamin Franklin was born 1706 and lived to 1790, Franklin was incredibly influenced by Leibniz's works, who was also a scientist. Defining a scientist as not a compartmentalized thing, what was Leibniz was working on, but rather science as a culture, which he also laid out ironworks and manufacturing in Russia, and also resource development. He also played a role in Peter the Great, starting the first Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg in 1724. So, I'm not going to go too much into Benjamin Franklin because, I mean, Matt has done a lot of classes which are up on the rising tide, and many people know at least elements of Benjamin Franklin. But on February 3rd, 1781, when Benjamin Franklin was stationed in Paris, France, Russian Princess Ekaterina Romanova-Dashkova was doing a European tour, and Benjamin Franklin made the point to visit her. She was 37 at the time, Franklin was 75. I'm going to go into Dashkova's background a bit more, because she's a truly fascinating person. So at the time, Franklin was serving diplomatically in France for the cause of American independence, because in 1781, America still didn't have its independence. It would only be until the Treaty of Paris in 1783. So about 8 years later, Benjamin Franklin would be recruited as the first American member into the Russian Academy of Sciences, to which Dashkova was the director of. And Dashkova in turn would be the first woman and Russian, I believe the first Russian as well, to be admitted into Franklin's American Philosophical Society. So this was not just, you know, for show or, you know, some extra badge to put on your outfit, but this was really an agreement for an intelligence exchange for Republican ideas. And I will back that up as I go into a little bit more of Dashkova's life. So Dashkova, at an early age, it's too bad George's daughter wasn't here. As a teenager, she had already amassed a library of 900 books and had learned 5 languages. And at 19, she dressed in an officer's uniform and played an important role, arguably the leading role, in the coup d'etat that allowed Catherine the Great to take the throne from her husband. So Dashkova played a leading strategic role in that success. In 1782, she was appointed the director of the Imperial Academy of Sciences, which is a picture of it right here. She was the first woman in the world to lead a learned society. And Dashkova had succeeded in transitioning the Academy of Sciences from an adornment of the court to a scientific contributor to Russia. So at the time, like I was saying, there wasn't really a sciences, so to speak, back then, was that the scientists in those days were considered ornaments of royalty. So you were basically just supposed to get published in other countries to show off. It's like show-off pieces, but there wasn't really a concept of what you could do to uplift your own people or to uplift anything, right? They were just, you know, entertaining ideas. So at the time when Dashkova took over the academy, it was in bankruptcy. There was a very corrupt person before her, but she not only got it out of bankruptcy, but was able to create a career scientist rather than an ornament of the crown, where they could actually focus on things that could be implemented within Russia. And she actually made a bit of a folk story. I don't know if it's actually true, but just like the story of how the Irish saved civilization during the medieval times, she was saying that it was really Russia, the Slavic people, who also played a role like this, and that's why they've always been scientists, because they were able to save a lot of these great works when Europe was going through a dark age. So, what else did I want to say? So she also had started, it's going to get confusing because their names are very similar, but she started a Russian Academy of Language as well to study the Russian language, literature, and culture, which sounds like not that amazing, but the importance of this is that language was still developing, and the Russian language in particular was still developing in the communication of ideas. And in order to be a good scientist, you need to have the words to communicate ideas that have not existed before. So it's actually quite at the forefront, and Leibniz also was constantly having to create his own words to explain thought concepts that there were no words for. So Dashkova actually took up a project to create a dictionary that was incredibly influential in also dealing with words of morality, politics, and government that didn't exist before. And it was praised by the poet Pushkin, so that's a pretty high-level person to have praise from. Is there anything else I want to take a note of here? So, yeah, her directorship ended in 1793, right? So here is where there's no clear indication that Dashkova was a Republican in her ideology, but she was very close to Catherine the Great, and they became further and further apart. And then near the end of her life, there were two controversies that point to the fact that she probably was moving towards further Republican ideas, and this is how she was shaping these two very influential academies, basically think tanks, you can think of them, right? Leading think tanks. And so there was this play called Vadim of Novgorod by Nyazin, and it was really controversial because it thought it had, Catherine the Great and many others thought it had Republican sympathies, and the French Revolution just happened, so a bunch, Marie Antoinette, she got her head chopped off, a whole bunch of people got their head chopped off, and Catherine the Great was worried that this was to, increase that kind of sentiment. And on top of it, Dashkova's closest brother, who also had a position at the Imperial Academy of Sciences, his protege, had written one of the most influential books in Russian history called The Journey from St. Petersburg to Moscow. People related to Uncle Tom's Cabin in the sense that it was highly critical of the slave system, the serf system in Russia. And so with these two things, Dashkova had to resign from her post. And so I think that with her relationship with Benjamin Franklin and how she was shaping these two academies, I think that it very much was moving towards this Republican idea. So we'll say a little bit of Franklin's American Philosophical Society and what it meant to be a member, because not just anybody was admitted membership into this. Alexander von Humboldt, who was one of the greatest German scientists of the time, was a member of the American Philosophical Society. And he says a great quote. Do you want to read it, Matt?
Yeah. In considering the study of physical phenomena, not merely in its bearings on the material wants of life, but in its general influence on the intellectual advancement of mankind, we find its noblest and most important result to be a knowledge of the chain of connection by which all natural forces are linked together and made mutually dependent upon each other. And it is the perception of these relations that exalts our view and ennobles our enjoyments.
So, I know that's a mouthful, but it's okay. It's a repeating theme, so it'll become more clear. Humboldt recognized, as did Benjamin Franklin, that the sciences and economy are two sides of the same coin. The human mind and what we do to support ourselves is the domain of the scientist and the statesman alike. There's no separation from natural sciences or physics and moral science, and it all came together under political economy. Humboldt resurrected the use of the word cosmos from ancient Greek and assigned it to his multi-volume treatise called Cosmos, in which he sought to unify diverse branches of scientific knowledge and culture. This important work also motivated a holistic perception of the universe as one interacting entity. Again, this whole concept of open system. And man's role in this system as its highest expression so far. Vernadsky, who was the later director of the Russian Academy of Sciences in the 20th century, also studied Alexander von Humboldt. So again, this communication constantly happening between the Americans and the Russians. And he also, this idea of infrastructure and progress as a part of nature, that progress exists in nature, but that mankind makes it subject to willful self-development. This in turn influenced Vernadsky's conceptualization of the noosphere, which is the domain of nature shaped by human thought. This is a picture of the American Philosophical Society. I'm not going to talk too much about it, just the point being that this society, you know, when you say philosophy today, you never think of like philosophy that actually affects anything in your world. You're just talking about stuff and you don't even need to prove that what you're talking about actually is a good idea or is true. In Benjamin Franklin's Philosophical Society, there's no such thing. There's no ivory tower academia and abstract philosophy that would benefit no one, but you know, give you possibly a fancy title. But rather it was focused on philosophy that could put ideas into practice. This involved all domains, so there is many scientists within this philosophical society and statesmen, but it especially focused on political economy. Benjamin Franklin's discovery of electricity was representative of the expected standard for contribution towards society within this society. So we'll skip ahead. Gilpin, who's both his grandfather and his father and his uncle, whoa, what's going on, were members of the American Philosophical Society. And Gilpin is one of the first, if not the first, to talk about the World Land Bridge. So I don't know if you see, no, you don't see the bottom of it. So the whole title of the map is supposed to say Gilpin's American Economic Just and Correct Map of the World. So Gilpin was very influenced by Alexander von Humboldt's Cosmos, which he took with him in all his travels. And in 1846, William Gilpin was voted head to the committee of in Missouri to draft the resolutions for the Transcontinental Railway. And his idea was always that this transcontinental railway would be a gateway to China. Someone want to read a quote from Gilpin where he explains his thoughts on this? All right, I'll read it.
Let it be resolved.
Okay, do it.
Let it be resolved that whereas the Almighty has placed the territories of the American Union in the center between Asia and Europe, and the route of the Asiatic and European railway through the heart of our nation domain, it is our duty to the human family to prosecute vigorously through its new channel that supreme commence between the Oriental nations and the nations of the Atlantic, which history proves to have existed in all ages, and to be necessary to keep alive community, science and civilization among mankind.
A lot of ideas for what seems to be such a simple line going from point A to point B. Another amazing thing is that a lot of this had to be implemented during the Civil War, one of the most expensive wars in history, and violent. So some may snidely remark that Gilpin's affinity for China was mere pragmatism based purely upon economic or geopolitical advantage over the British. However, in 1852, a testimony by German scientist Julius Froebel tells a different story. Froebel, again a student of Alexander von Humboldt, also editor of the Swiss Republican newspaper, spent several months with Gilpin in Independence, Missouri, and his accounts express a much higher level of understanding of the paradigm which united China and America under one mandate of heaven, through whose submission alone America could find salvation from the corrupting effects of European influence. So Julius Froebel says, sorry, it's not very clear, this culture, he, Gilpin, admits, has become degenerate in America itself, but in China it is still found in a pure state. Hence, salvation must come to America from China. Interesting. And this consists in the introduction of the Chinese Constitution vis-a-vis the patriarchal democracy of the Celestial Empire. The political life of the United States is through European influences in a state of complete demoralization. So at this time, slavery, the southern plantations were at their peak. And the Chinese Constitution alone contains elements of regeneration. For this reason, a railroad to the Pacific is of such vast importance, since by its means the Chinese trade will be conducted straight across the North American continent. This trade must bring in its train Chinese civilization, and that is usually alleged against China. All that is usually alleged against China is mere calumny spread purposefully, just like those calumnies which are circulated in Europe about the United States. So a lot of people, they think that the United States is all about colonizing other places. Interesting that one of the leaders in the thought process and the development of the transcontinental rail was saying we need to do this to save ourselves, and China is going to save us. So just to compare, this is a map of the British Empire around the same time, and it's not based on a rail system, right, as you see here. Obviously this is a much more simplistic version, but it's rather based off of naval dominance. So it's very easy for the British Empire to keep control as long as there wasn't rail built. And the red sections are either areas where they had their commonwealths or where they had their slave power colonies existing. So, describing the grand design for international public works, Gilpin would write the 1890 magnum opus called the Cosmopolitan Railway. And he states, Railways continue to extend themselves, soon to become a universal system over all the lands of the globe. We have seen the energies of the American people bringing into line and into use these new powers, span their continent with the Pacific railways as with the rapidity of lightning from a mountain cloud, availing themselves of the favorable thermal warmth upon the plateau and upon the immediate sea coasts. Bathed by the Asiatic Gulf Stream, they will continue to expand their work to Bering Straits, where all the continents are united. This will extend itself along similarly propitious thermal selvage of the oriental Russian coasts into China. He's using terminology from Alexander von Humboldt. To prolong this unbroken line of cosmopolitan railways along the latitudinal plateau of Asia to Moscow and to London will not have long delay. The less significant and isolated continents of the southern hemisphere, South America, Africa, and Australasia, will be reached by feeders through Panama, Suez, and the chain of oriental peninsulas and islands. The whole area and all the populations of the globe will thus be united and fused by land travel and railway. So this is a picture of Cassius Marcellus Clay, which unfortunately has been quite overshadowed by the naming of Muhammad Ali's original name. They're not related, but there is a connection in the sense that Muhammad Ali's father, I think, went to this college that I'm going to talk about and was named after Cassius Clay, which he passed down to his son. So in 1845, Cassius Marcellus Clay of Lexington, Kentucky, proclaimed himself the first to ever beard the monster in his den when he founded True American, an anti-slavery newspaper. He was the son of a prominent Southern plantation owner. However, he heard Garrison's speeches and he immediately freed his slaves, and then a year later he set up this anti-slavery paper.
This is William Lloyd Garrison?
Yeah. So a realist, he fireproofed his print shop that was printing this anti-slavery paper since it wasn't popular with a lot of people. He fireproofed it with iron, positioned 2 cannons at the door, and hung rifles on the wall. He's quite a character. He's very, and as you'll see, he got along with the Russians really well. Clay's hubris so inflamed the neighbors that while he was sick at home, only then did the mob dare to empty the premises. Clay moved his printing operation to Cincinnati, continuing to edit at his Lexington office. After giving a speech in Texas denouncing slavery in 1849, he single-handedly fought off 6 attackers.
Wow.
Clay's,
He's like 6 foot 3 or something.
you haven't even heard it yet.
Get him by the door.
Clay's fiery opposition to slavery would come to encompass the system's impact on whites as well. Slavery, he vehemently argued, hurt the South and its white workers. The North was radiant with railroads, the channels of her untold commerce, whilst the South hobbles on at immeasurable distance behind. Instead of retreating into wealth and the privileged life of a Southern planter, Clay campaigned ardently against slavery, decrying its harm to blacks and to poor whites. In 1899, in Kentucky, the Berea College, which you see a picture of here, student body was visibly more racially diverse than its counterparts around the nation. And this was because they were very influenced by Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was born in Kentucky and shaped the thoughts of the people there. It was also one of the few colleges, I think, to admit women students as well. In 1912, the tuition-free institution reached out to needy students across Appalachia, a gesture recalling Clay's antebellum interest in educating poor whites. Berea's motto, the name of the college, remains, "God has made of one blood all peoples of the earth." So after organizing, he actually, because when Lincoln was first inaugurated, his life was on the line. You know, there was a whole plot to kill him, and they had to have someone acting as Lincoln, and they raided the carriage, and they found out that Lincoln was already at the White House. Cassius Marcellus Clay also got wind of this, and he organized a battalion to defend the White House. So they made sure that nobody would storm the White House during this transition period.
Also, just so you know, William Gilpin was one of Lincoln's bodyguards.
Right, William Gilpin was also one of Lincoln's bodyguards when he had to get into Washington, D.C. to be inaugurated. So there's a quote from Cassius: "It is an evil to the free laborer by forcing him by the laws of competition, supply, and demand to work for the wages of the slave, food, and shelter. The competition of unrequited service, slave labor, dooms the laboring white millions of these states to poverty. Poverty gives them over to ignorance, and ignorance and poverty are the fast high roads to crime and suffering." So again, as Martin Luther King recognized, the slavery system was not just against the black slaves, but it was to take away the humanity of everyone, and it was to also keep white people in poverty. In 1861, so this was all the same year when Lincoln had to get into Washington, D.C. to be inaugurated, and he organized this battalion. That same year, as the story goes, Cassius Clay was too volatile, bombastic of a person to lead a regiment, according to Lincoln. I don't know why he had those thoughts. So Lincoln suggested that he become the ambassador to Spain, and Cassius Clay was like, how about ambassador to Russia? And so he started his historical position as ambassador to Russia. He's probably the greatest U ambassador to Russia that has ever held that position, which he held in 1861 to 62 and then 63 to 69. So he quickly made steadfasting relations. They say, because Tsar Alexander II, he freed his serfs that year, they say that Cassius Clay actually played a role in, obviously Tsar Alexander II was thinking of doing this already, but that Cassius got the ball rolling, and that year that he went into Russia, Tsar Alexander II freed the serfs, which were 23 million in number.
Wow, 23 million.
Yeah. He also became good friends with the Dashkova family, which he frequently cited in his memoirs, another indication that the Dashkova family are Republicans. Clay was also going to play as the key negotiator for the Alaska purchase with Seward, which I'll go through in more detail later. So in 1861, the Emancipation Edict was passed and successfully carried out by Tsar Alexander II, which would free 23 million serfs. This was by no means a simple task, for there was much resistance met and required an amazing degree of statesmanship on the part of Tsar Alexander II. And here's a quote that he said to the marshals of nobility in 1856, so 5 years before he would do this. He states, "You can yourself understand that the present order of owning souls cannot remain unchanged. It is better to abolish serfdom from above than to wait for that time when it starts to abolish itself from below, as in a rebellion or a revolution. I ask you to think about the best way to carry this out." So he's giving them time. You know, it's a lot to think about, 23 million serfs to be freed, but it's going to happen. Do I have any more notes here? The success of this edict would go down in history as one of the greatest accomplishments for human freedom, and Tsar Alexander II would become known as the Great Liberator, for which he was beloved around the world, though we don't hear about those sorts of things today. Shortly after, in 1863, President Lincoln would pass the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. There is astonishingly a great deal of cynicism around this today. It is thought that because Lincoln did not announce this at the beginning of the war, it somehow was never genuine. The preservation of the country was to be the utmost priority, since you needed the effort of a country to end slavery. Lincoln was willing to see out the end of slavery over a longer period if it could have meant avoiding the Civil War, which again, it was the most violent and costly war, I think, at that time. When it became clear that this was not possible and all-out war was inevitable, he declared that slavery would be abolished in the Confederate-held states upon the Union's victory. So here is just a speech he gave 7 years before he would become president, just to give an indication of how he was talking. He didn't even have the idea of running for president in mind at this time. This declared indifference by, as I must think, covert real zeal for the spread of slavery, I cannot but hate. I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself. I hate it because it deprives our Republican example of its just influence in the world, enables the enemies of free institutions with plausibility to taunt us as hypocrites, causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our sincerity, and especially because it forces so many really good men among ourselves into an open war with the very fundamental principle of civil liberty, criticizing the Declaration of Independence and insisting that there is no right principle of action but self-interest. I actually just did a class not too long ago on Frederick Douglass and Lincoln, which goes on this subject further. If there are people who are stubborn that it never was meant, the Civil War was never fought to end slavery.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to Solutions Watch. In March of 2021, I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and today we're going to be talking to a new guest who I am going to assume is already familiar to a lot of you in the crowd, but maybe not. His name is Curtis Stone, and you might know him as the Urban Farmer, although maybe we should start addressing him as the artist formerly known as the Urban Farmer. I think he has some qualifications about that term, but we'll get into that. The best way to find him right now is fromthefield.tv, but he has presence in a lot of different places online. We'll talk about that today. Curtis Stone, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thanks for having me, James. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, as I say, Curtis Stone, the Urban Farmer, was kind of the moniker under which I think you gained quite a lot of notoriety online, but that is changing. You've changed perspectives like a lot of us in the past year. Tell us about your change.
Yeah, so I mean, I got into urban farming because it was really the easiest way for me to get into farming at the time. I've kind of taken the stead pill per se a while ago, but I didn't really have the means to do it, because to go and buy land is to buy land and then put up a bunch of resources to build stuff on the land. So I got into agriculture by basically just leasing out people's front and backyards. And I started a business, a commercial farming business that way. And that was kind of my foray into being on the land, and, built a career out of that. But as you know, and many of your viewers know, the cities aren't all that hot right now. And so a lot of the things that were great about urban farming, even just a couple of years ago, are not there. I mean, when you've got a lot of people around the world social distancing, and they're just terrified, they're afraid to talk to one another, you don't get the same, a big part of what's great about urban farming is it's the social aspect. And it's probably one of the most actually practical parts of it, which really moves the needle in a positive way, I think. The food production is, let's be honest, you can produce food on bigger farms easier. But the urban aspect connects people, gets people together. You have a conversation with your neighbor. Politics aside, culture aside, sometimes language aside, talking to people walking by your garden is a great way to get to know people and sort of proselytize the idea of growing your own food. But the city right now it's scary. It's really scary. And it's not that it's scary. I'm not scared, but it's the people that walk by that just no longer want to engage. They're either wearing a mask, they want to just get to their destination really quick, or they're on their phones. So it's not so great. And if you're paying attention to what's going on, especially here in Canada, we're moving into a serious technocracy, and there are things happening in cities particularly that are going to make life more and more miserable. And so myself, my wife, and my two children, we want to be in the countryside and try to preserve as much as we can of our lifestyle.
I think a lot of people are going to resonate with what you're saying, regardless of where they are right now physically, because we've seen over the course of the past year. I mean, just take the prime example, New York City. I mean, who wants to live in a place like that at this point? There's a lot of people who are leaving, and for obvious reasons. But the question is, where do you go and what do you start to do? And you mentioned the stead pill. I know what you mean by that, but I'm thinking there's probably a lot of people who don't. Let's talk about homesteading and what this concept is.
Yeah, so I mean, the stead pill is really the idea, kind of like catching people, like what the red pill means. We all know what that means. We've all taken it if they're watching your show. But I think a lot of the truth community don't really. They look at problems. They've read books like Tragedy and Hope or Great, listen to your shows for years and have a criticisms of what's going on, but not necessarily a lot of solutions to, okay, well, what do you do? There's lots of solutions. You've covered them in this show for years. But getting on the land and actually, being able to be in control of your food, water, energy, and shelter are huge, because just look at what happened in Texas, right? Look at what can happen anywhere in centralized systems is a switch can be flipped, and then all of a sudden, you are waiting in a breadline. And so this is really all about taking accountability for that, especially in this time we're in now. I don't think there's ever been a better time to get on the land, or at least get into smaller areas where there's less people, especially less crazy people, and start taking account for providing for yourself in the world.
So let's talk about that concept and people who are incredulous. I mean, can you really provide your own food, water, shelter, and energy? I mean, how are you going to do that? It's such a monumental task. Can you just go out there and start doing it? I mean, obviously you have to build up to it. How do you do that?
It is a monumental task. There's no question about it. But it's like anything, baby steps. Just start. Get things going now. I mean, one thing people can start doing is just having food stored. That's really important. And then you can start planting some food. I got into farming without owning any land and just started growing in people's front and backyards. So it's taken me really 10 years to get to a point where I can go out into the land and be confident that I can just carve it out and make it happen. But one way is just to really look at one particular problem. I mean, for me, I call them the four nexuses of human survival, the main four: food, water, energy, shelter. Okay, start with one. Which one food's probably, well, shelter is an easy one, but shelter in more or less being off grid and having heat. I've got a wood fire stove behind me here. It's kind of taking a pick at some of these and just doing something about it. So, I mean, one thing I started this year with some friends, just as sort of an experiment, is we started a cooperative farm. And I'm no longer commercially farming, but we basically went and leased a half an acre of land from a friend of mine's farm and just got it prepared, put greenhouses on it, and started growing food together. And the work was very little, because when we're all pitching in, maybe we spent 4 hours a week total of labor between all 5 people at the time to take care of it. And it was easy. We just kind of, it happens. So the key is to just get something started and push forward.
All right. All right, let's talk about that. So as I say, I know a lot of people are feeling this and are looking around at their urban hellhole and wondering how they can get out, and are starting to think along these lines. For people who find themselves in that boat, what sorts of considerations do they start looking at when they're trying to choose where to go?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think everybody's context is different, but let's imagine from the position of somebody living in a big city like Are you from Calgary originally, Edmonton, or
Calgary. Don't say Edmonton.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, somebody living in a big city like that, it's like just getting out of that city alone would do a lot for a sense of security with where we're going, I think. Going to a smaller community. We can't all buy land, but perhaps you could move to a smaller community and rent a house. What you would pay for rent in downtown Calgary compared to what you would pay for rent in, some tiny town out like Coaldale, Alberta or something. You can probably rent a house with a lot of yard space and have a lot of garden space just doing that as a renter. That's an easy thing that people could do. Because to go and buy land is a big step. But something like that, just getting out of the city, getting out of the way of the craziness that's going to be going on and is going on, and then taking control of your food in some way or another, getting some gardens going, really having a lot of seeds and having a lot of food, stored food are two huge things. And then gardening is kind of the next step. But we can still buy things right now. And so let's take advantage of the time that we have. Things are available. We're not in absolute food crisis yet. So just having food stored is going to be huge.
So here's my take, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I think you brought it up earlier. The sort of the community social aspect to urban farming is an essential part of this, because you are connecting with other people and proselytizing and or sharing ideas and or meeting like-minded people. That is an aspect of what people are thirsting for right now, as they're being locked down and locked away from each other and you can't talk to other human beings. Yeah, we are thirsting for that kind of social interaction. And that, to me, speaks to the idea of community as being the base of what we need to achieve. It's great to be able to think that I can be the lone wolf, eating bugs and rainwater and living completely off the land, 100% self-sufficient, but I don't think that's the solution for everyone, or even for most people, or even for anyone, ? Maybe there are people who can do that. But I think it has to come down to community. And my sense is that you're never going to achieve the 100% self-sufficiency, but if you can at least become more self-reliant in a number of different ways and form connections with people in your area that can help to supplement that and create that community. That's kind of the vision of what I'm thinking for this. But tell me what your perspective is.
Well, and I agree. I agree 100%. No, the whole lone wolf prepper strategy is really difficult. And like, I'm a very social guy. I'm extroverted, and so I love to have people around me, and we've kind of done that naturally, even just by coming out to where we are. We've connected with a lot of people, but you're right. And so much of what's going to happen going forward is we're almost going to have to form our own sort of private societies, our own private communities. Because if it gets to the point where, in Canada, there's rumors of this Canada Health Pass coming out where, you don't have this vaccine, you can't do anything. And I think it'll take time. That'll probably take years down the road till you can't go to the grocery store without it, because that would just be genocide in a way to a lot of people, right? The system doesn't want that to happen so quickly, but it might get to that point in time, especially with enough propaganda and enough fear mongering with all of this. It could get that way, but people are really going to have to start collaborating in so many different ways and saying, look, like, come together. And I always tell people, you should know 5 people that have your back no matter what. That if things happen really quickly and you need to move or you need to go somewhere or you're just in need, 5 people that have your back and you would do the same for them. That's the beginning of a community. And what's so important about community too is that we need to have reasons to be in a community. Just coming together in a community and saying, hey, we all like to, sit around and smoke weed and talk politics. That's not really enough needs and benefits are so important in community. And I think if we can find ways to, hey, I'll grow vegetables and fruit, and then I'll source my eggs from the guy down the street, or I'll source my pork from the guy up the road, or things like this. Having these connections, especially starting to form them now, will be very important as things get tighter. And so that's one thing I always do. Everywhere I am, I always talk to other farmers, and because I'm a farmer, I can kind of know how to strike up conversation with them and get to know them, and I take that very seriously. And we get very little of our food from the conventional system, so the majority of it comes from things we grow or things that we can get from people we know.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about From the Field then. Why did you start this and what kind of material do you have there?
So I started that a couple years ago. I saw the writing on the wall with the censorship, and I was getting to a point, most people just knew me as a guy who made videos about urban farming and things like that. But I kind of started to have a hard time keeping my mouth shut on certain issues. I've been watching your videos for years, and took the red pill a long time ago, really. Read G. Edward Griffin's book, was one of the first books I ever read, kind of blew my mind about central banking. And I couldn't help but started talking about this stuff. So I knew at some point that the censors would come for me, as they have come for you. And so I said, I'm just going to create my own platform and then just start. And, if only 1% of my audience on YouTube come in there, great. And that's what it was to start. And it's probably more than that now. But it's basically been my way of protecting myself from the tech censors, and just controlling my content and deciding what I want to say and where I want to put it, and not have to worry about somebody deleting my videos.
So what kind of content? I mean, like, people who don't know about what you're doing, what specific kind of examples of things?
Specifically, what I do is I showcase the work that I do on the land, farming, market gardening, now designing a broad-acre permaculture property. And then I've traveled around the world interviewing other great farmers and homesteaders and off-gridders and preppers, and I put all that content into this site. So what's different about this than a place like YouTube is it's difficult to make a career as a content creator if you are making long-form content. I'm sure you could probably relate with me on this, is because if things aren't clickbaity, YouTube isn't really going to pay you much money. So I have found that it's important to just go to the niche, the small amount of people that want quality. And so we do high quality, long form, super detailed content that isn't about clicks and nice thumbnails and whatever. It's just about conveying a specific idea on a certain type of land, like looking at something like aquaculture, really delving into that with an expert. And so I travel to them and document all these great growers.
Now, okay, so as I say, I'm sure everyone is thinking about this in some sense. Wherever they are, I'm sure they're looking at what the nonsense that's going on and thinking, I got to get out of here in some way. But obviously that's not possible, or at least not all at once for everyone. Is there a sort of intermediate step that people can be taking, or ways that people can, in an urban environment, be preparing themselves? Or are you giving up on that altogether?
No, because let's face it, a lot of good people are going to be in a situation where they just can't pick up and quit their job, or maybe they have a family and their wife isn't totally on board with them, or vice versa, or who knows? There's an infinite amount of circumstances. Yes, there are things people can do to prepare. I think in a city, it's really important to have a backup plan. Like, where are you going to go if it gets so unbearable and the boot of the state is on your neck and everybody else's, and you're going, I have to get out of here. We have to leave now. So you need to have an alternative way to get out. Usually that's not a car, because if everybody wants to get out of the city, if everybody gets woke at the same time, nobody's getting out, right? So having an alternative way to get out, that could be a dirt bike, that could be a good mountain bike. You should have a bug out bag, like a bag that you can basically just grab and go, that has at least 7 days of food in it, water, some basic survival supplies, maybe a ham radio, or some things that you could just grab and go. Also having, if you're stuck in a city, just having a way to cook some food, heat your home, and have some food. So say it was everybody wants to get out at once. Like I said, nobody's getting out. You might say, well, you know what? It might be better just to lay low for 7 days, 8 days, let the craziness die down, then go. And so you need to have a way to cook. You need to have a way to heat your home and all these things. And so everybody, I always say this, everybody should have at least 1 year's worth of stored food in their home. That's not that hard to do. Just like a lot of dried stuff, so you're not going to have the best meals, but you can eat and survive. Everybody should have something like that in their home. And then this way you at least have options if the time comes where you have to get out and you got to hunker down for a while, or you just got to get up and go.
All right. I really want to start getting into sort of specific techniques and things, but hopefully we can do that in the future. Today was just to introduce people to the idea of homesteading and what this entails. Are there any sort of last thoughts you want to leave people with on this topic?
Yeah. I mean, if people want to see some of the stuff that I'm doing on my land, again, they can head to my website, fromthefield.tv. But the thing that it's important, I think, to finish with is that I say all this stuff not because I want to create fear. I'm not trying to, and I know you're not trying to create fear. We talk about these things to raise awareness and just give people a dose of reality. And so I always say it looks like things are going crazy, but enjoy it. Have fun, be happy, because if you're miserable and the world's going to shit, you still lose. You might as well enjoy it and have fun. And so, that's what's kind of nice about doing anything on the land, whether it's growing your own food or put it in a small orchard or just starting to think about how you exist on the land. It's really enjoyable. Getting grounded and connecting with the earth is something that so many people are lacking in their lives right now, and it's something that brings such an incredible quality of life, and it's great for kids too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I imagine. Yeah, what better education could there be than the education that humanity has had for however many millennia, which
Absolutely.
is growing up, producing your own food, interacting with people in the real world, rather than sitting there in front of screens in their urban hellhole. Yeah, absolutely. I imagine everyone will resonate with that message. If they don't, I don't know what they're doing here. But the question is how they bring that to their own personal situation. And as you say, context is everything, and there's so many different situations that people find themselves in. I hope they will at least start checking out your work and looking for specific ideas of what they can be implementing in their own lives. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. As I say, I want to continue having this conversation in the future. Curtis, thank you so much for coming on today.
Right on, James. Thank you.
Long time ago, 1706, I believe, is when the agreement was signed between our people and the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. We signed an agreement. It came out in a wampum belt, and it's called the One Dish, One Spoon Wampum. The One Dish, One Spoon Wampum. And in that, they said that, our people sat down and they said, we eat from one dish. We eat from one dish. In this case, Ohio River Valley. We eat from one place. So nobody should take more than they need. Take care of the animals that are there because we eat from one dish. And then they said, let us eat with one spoon, because if we eat with one spoon, then we're relatives, So I feel like this moment in time is our moment to do that, is to become good relatives, good ancestors, the people that make things beautiful.